What is it about this grant that you and EPA believe is problematic enough to freeze this funding and put potentially 31,000 children at risk?
Senator, who is the grant applicant?
This is to the city of Santa Ana.
You have the biggest state, so we're going to have to go through every single list of the grant.
Well,
by the way, with that wind-up, by the way, I understand that you were an aspiring fiction writer. I see why.
Oh, yeah. Well, I understand your view that you can cut half of the agency and it won't affect people's health or their water, their air. That, to me, is a big fiction, Mr. Zeldin.
You forgot about the fact of cleaning up
I have to think,
LA
Mr. Zeldin,
wildfires.
I think, Mr. Zeldin, if your children were drinking water, if your children were drinking water in Santa Ana, Mr. Zeldin, maybe you wouldn't be so cavalier about whether there was lead in their water.
There are moments in hearings where politics disappears and the reality of consequences takes over, and this is one of those moments. Schiff doesn't just challenge Zeldin, he turns budget cuts and frozen grants into something painfully human: children breathing dirtier air, families drinking contaminated water, and futures quietly shaped by decisions made far from the people who will feel them. And when Zeldin tries to minimize the impact, Schiff hits him with a line designed to expose the entire narrative he's been selling.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Zeldin, you've only been at the EPA for a few months, but in that time, you've done more to dismantle this agency than probably all of your predecessors put together. That may be a source of pride for you, but it is not for the American people. You've unlawfully terminated grants without justification. You've fired and pushed out some of the best scientists who inform EPA's decision-making. You refuse to spend money that Congress has appropriated to the EPA by law. And you've launched a pro-polluter effort to delete dozens of environmental protections. On top of all this, you've launched an effort to overturn California's Clean Air Act waivers that improve the quality of air breathed by 40 million Californians and by millions more in other states who have adopted California's high standards. That effort, for which my colleagues have decided to eliminate the filibuster to achieve, is not exactly what anyone would call cooperative federalism. But it's your budget that's the ultimate proof of your priorities. You propose cutting America's environmental agency by 55%, meaning that in your view, and that of President Trump, more than half of the environmental efforts of the EPA, more than half of the efforts to make sure Americans have clean air and clean water are just a waste. They're just a waste. Meaning that Californians and people all over the country, when they breathe the air, thanks to your good work, it'll mean there's more diesel and more other particulate matter in the air. When they drink a glass of water, they may not be able to see it, but this water that Americans drink is going to have more chemicals like PFAS, forever chemicals in their water. This will be your good work. I want to be very specific about the legacy you're going to leave if you're successful in eliminating half of our efforts to clean our water and our air. Your legacy will be more lung cancer. It'll be more bladder cancer. It'll be more head and neck cancer. It'll be more breast cancer. It'll be more leukemia and pancreatic cancer, more liver cancer, more skin cancer, more kidney cancer, more testicular cancer, more colorectal cancer, more rare cancers of innumerable varieties. That will be your legacy. I don't know that that's a legacy that anyone should want to have. My kids are going to be breathing that air just like yours. My family's going to be drinking the water just like yours. We may not be able to pinpoint just who gets cancer because you've done away with half the budget of those looking out for our clean water and clean air. But it's going to be somebody's kids, it's going to be somebody's family. To put this in more specific terms, there are 22 grants frozen by the EPA focused on improving health and reducing pollution, many of which directly impact children. For example, one project in Santa Ana, California, provided funding to help detect and prevent lead poisoning in children. According to the census, about 10% of the population in Santa Ana are under the age of 9. With a population of about 310,000 people, that means that 31,000 children are at risk of lead poisoning in Santa Ana without this funding. What is it about this grant that you and EPA believe is problematic enough to freeze this funding and put potentially 31,000 children at risk?
Senator, who is the grant applicant?
This is to the city of Santa Ana.
You have the biggest, state, so we're going to have to go through every single list of the grant. Well, by the way, with that wind-up, by the way, I understand that you were an aspiring fiction writer. I see why.
Oh, yeah. Well, I understand your view that you can cut half of the agency and it won't affect people's health or their water or their air. That, to me, is a big fiction, Mr. Zeldin.
You forgot about the fact of cleaning up
I have to think,
LA
Mr. Zeldin, I think, Mr. Zeldin, if your children were drinking water, if your children were drinking water in Santa Ana, Mr. Zeldin, maybe you wouldn't be so cavalier about whether there was lead in their water. Maybe you would give a damn instead of coming in here and suggesting that any grant that takes lead out of the water must be waste, fraud, or abuse because you need
time has expired.
the money for a tax cut for rich people because you're totally beholden to the oil industry. You could give a rat's ass about how much cancer your agency causes.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Adam Schiff's strategy here is deliberate. He starts with specific, documented actions, frozen grants, the firing of scientists, unspent congressional appropriations, the rollback of environmental protections, and connects every one of them to real-world consequences. He isn't arguing in the abstract. He's showing how these decisions travel downstream into classrooms, neighborhoods, and water systems. He lists illnesses not to dramatize, but to force the room to confront the physical cost of environmental neglect. Budgets and percentages can feel distant. Cancer does not. Cancer is the moment a family receives news that reshapes their lives. By naming lung cancer, leukemia, pancreatic cancer, and others, Schiff makes it impossible to pretend this is a theoretical debate. And then comes Zeldin's shrug, the casual dismissal of scientific warnings and public health data. That's why Schiff delivers the now viral line, "I understand that you are an aspiring fiction writer. I see why." That sentence is more than a jab. It reframes Zeldin's argument as a story that doesn't survive contact with reality. Schiff is essentially saying, if you think cutting the EPA by half has no human cost, then you're not describing policy, you're writing fantasy. To help viewers understand the mechanics, consider this. EPA grants pay for the people who fix pipes, test children for lead, and monitor chemicals in water. When the grants freeze, the work stops. No one replaces it. Exposure continues. Risks grow. These are not ideological outcomes. They're predictable ones. When scientists are pushed out, the agency loses institutional knowledge. The regulatory process slows, weakens, and sometimes collapses entirely. That makes it easier for pollution to go undetected and harder for communities to get warnings in time. Schiff also highlights how weakening California's Clean Air Act waivers threatens millions. These waivers allow states to set higher standards when needed. Rolling them back means more particulate pollution, pollution directly linked to respiratory disease and long-term cancer risk. The Santa Ana example brings the point home. Saying 31,000 children are at risk for lead exposure forces us to visualize real kids in real homes. Lead poisoning doesn't make headlines, it makes disabilities. It limits who a child can become before they even get a chance to grow up. Schiff goes further by naming the political forces behind the cuts. Industry interests, tax cut agendas, not to moralize, but to show how incentives are steering policy towards short-term corporate benefit and away from long-term public health. In the end, Schiff tightens the lens. He forces the moral question. When leaders know the risks, understand the science, and still dismantle protections, what responsibility do they bear for the outcomes? That's not rhetoric, that's accountability. For viewers wanting to act, the tools exist. EPA grant data is public, scientific assessments are public, and every one of these decisions leaves a trail of documents showing exactly what was funded, what was cut, and what risks were flagged. That's why Schiff's fiction line lands. It challenges viewers to compare claims to evidence and to demand that policy be grounded in measurable truth rather than political storytelling. So now it's your turn. If leaders are warned that cuts will increase contamination and illness, and they go forward anyway, what do you call that? Ideology, negligence, or something worse? Tell me in the comments what environmental risks concern you most in your community. And if you want more breakdowns that pull the curtain back on the real-world impact of these hearing room decisions, subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.